What do you do when a wild animal, one of nature's most magnificent predators, knocks on your door, begging for help? It sounds like the premise of an outlandish fairy tale, doesn't it? Yet, this was the very essence of an extraordinary encounter that transformed a mundane day into a moment of unimaginable significance. Gather close, because something astonishing is about to unfold. In a small, serene village, framed by lush greenery and winding pathways, a family resided in their cozy home. They embraced the simplicity of life, reveling in every shared meal and joyful celebration as they forged unbreakable bonds. Little did they know, their world was about to collide with a far more primal reality. The sun climbed high in the sky that fateful afternoon. The golden rays draped over the world as if to proclaim a new dawn. The crisp air hummed with a strange anticipation, as the family of four, mom, dad, and their two curious children sat down for lunch, echoing laughter across the dining table. Suddenly, a soft pattering noise broke through the idyllic symphony of chirps and rustles, something out of the ordinary, pulling their attention away from the clinks of cutlery. Mom paused mid-sentence, her instincts ignited. Peering through the window, she squinted into the brightness. What she saw drew her breath short. Standing at the edge of their yard, heart hammering in her chest, was a lioness clutching a tiny cub in her jaws, desperation written across her face. Instinctively, she could feel her heart rate skyrocket. The fear was palpable. Here was a creature reaching out, teetering on the edge of vulnerability, an image that starkly contrasted with the conception of lions as fierce, untamed beasts. Psychologically speaking, fear often stimulates the fight or flight response, the instinct to retreat, safeguard the children, and deny the approach of the wild was ingrained deeply within them. Yet this was not just a beast, this was a mother, driven by her primal need to protect her own. The lioness's eyes sparkled with an unusual intelligence and an overwhelming sadness, reminiscent of how we see ourselves when we are stripped to our core, an uncanny metaphor for the universal maternal instinct. As the family exchanged fearful glances, Mom instinctively felt a connection deep within her being. It resonated like an echo of shared understanding. They too were parents who would do anything to safeguard their children. But could they reveal compassion in the face of fear? Could they perhaps bridge the gap that lies between civilization and the wild? With trepidation, Mom stepped toward the door, hand hovering over the doorknob. What was she doing? Every voice in her head screamed to stay inside. Safety was paramount. Yet, another deeper voice entwined itself with the nature of empathy, calling her to act, to understand the plight of this magnificent creature. The lioness, with her striking golden mane flowing in the wind, seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 stories upon her shoulders. She craved help, and they were the only hope she had in sight. It suggests that when individuals are faced with a situation requiring assistance, they often hesitate, assuming that someone else will step in. But in this moment, there was no one else, only her. With a courageous push, the door creaked open, revealing the towering figure of the lioness and the tiny cub peeking from the protective grasp of its mother. They were at her doorstep, raw, fragile, and so incredibly real. Fueled by an impulse greater than fear, Mom extended her hand, palm facing upward, as if to offer solace to this unwilling visitor. The children, wide-eyed and a mixture of awe and terror, stayed close behind their mother, hearts racing like a drum. This captivating scene unfolded, illuminating an age-old truth: vulnerability breeds vulnerability. The lioness stepped closer, allowing Mom to catch a glimpse of the cub, its soft fur and innocent gaze. It became clear that the lioness was not alone. She bore the burden of motherhood in an unforgiving realm. Suddenly, all the tales they had been told of the killer, the hunter, and the predatory instinct faded, replaced instead with the vivid truth of her present journey, one of survival and love. As one might expect, fear can distort perception, particularly when stripped of nuance. Mom felt a pull toward the lioness, who beyond the raw power, embodied the tenderness of maternal love. Just as the lioness reached a silent agreement to reveal her softer side, The family recognized an emotional kinship that transcended the species barrier. The family naturally felt the weight of the moment. No longer were they mere witnesses to the extraordinary, they were players in a drama that demanded unconditional empathy. Mom seized the opportunity. She beckoned her children forward, fostering a sense of communal connection and shared responsibility. Perhaps this was a potent lesson in compassion. Understanding lives beyond fear enhances human experience. With surprising grace, the lioness took a bold step closer, maintaining eye contact as if to strengthen the bond, breaking down the invisible walls that often divide us. The children watched, enraptured, their early lessons on kindness and empathy becoming fleshed out before their astounded eyes. The lioness nudged her cub slightly forward. Vulnerability unveiled an unspoken plea, a mother reaching out in a time of desperation. But why here? The family pondered the circumstances that had led this majestic creature to their doorstep. Had she strayed too far from home? Or was she seeking refuge, understanding that humans could be trusted, at least for this moment? In tandem, the silence hung thick with underlying tensions, each heartbeat amplifying the significance of the choice facing the family. As few individuals might realize, studies show that empathy can trigger a cascade of prosocial behaviors. By stepping into the lioness's paws, the family felt compelled to act. Mom turned back to her kids, shaking off the lingering anxiety that had chilled her open hand. "We have to do something," she whispered, determination coursing through her veins. At that moment it became apparent, this was about more than just helping a lioness. It was about the sanctity of life, the tenuous threads that weave through the tapestry of existence, connecting one creature to another in a symbiotic world. The family's house echoed with busy energy as they hastily rummaged for something, anything, that might help the lioness and her cub. They gathered scraps of meat from the refrigerator, offering something of value to the wild creatures before them. The act was simple and instinctive. It reflected the fundamental truth that extends beyond species. A mother craves nourishment for her child. Pushing past their initial trepidation, they engaged in a shared act of humanity, awakening a deeper bond they had never truly tapped into before. As Mom set down the pieces of meat just beyond the threshold, the lioness and her cub responded with cautious but undeniable eagerness. As they gently approached, eyes wide with longing, every ounce of fear melted away, replaced by a primal connection, a collective understanding of need and survival. The family held their breath, their hearts pounding, not out of fear this time, but in reverence for the beauty of vulnerability shared among living beings. Yet, as the moments melted away, dark clouds gathered in the distance, ominous yet tempting. Tensions in the wild sometimes beckoned as warnings even in the presence of compassion. They became acutely aware that they were not alone in this moment of grace. The lioness's appearance was no accident. It was a consequence of the harsh realities of nature, where survival often necessitates desperation. Would other predators circle in the shadows, driven by instinct, the same forces that neutralized the boundaries? As the family dared to lean into their instinct to help, that looming question painted shadows over the unfolding connection. How long could this moment of empathy last? In the back of their minds, they contemplated their safety. What if the lioness's appearance was not an isolated incident? Remember, they lived on the edge of a vast wilderness, far more unpredictable than they often considered. And so, they remained perched on the precipice of their shared humanity, a moment suspended in time, while outside forces began to converge, and the true motives of the wild awaited to reveal themselves. As they observed the noble lioness and her cub before them, the family stood at a crossroads, embracing the sweetness of connection and the bitterness of uncertainty. The blend of compassion and fear created a tapestry that painted their first real lesson of bravery. Just as easily as they had shown grace, they might also remain vulnerable to consequences they could not ignore. What would unfold next would test not only their newfound bond, but also the depths of their courage when confronted with the wild, where instincts by nature clash, revealing primal truths about survival that extend beyond circumstance. The lioness had asked for their help, but would their humanity, their very involvement, come at a cost that no one had prepared for? just as their moment of empathy reached a climax. The intrusions of the wild likely sent shockwaves through their serene world, echoing the age-old struggle for coexistence. The narrative around choice beckoned. What would they do when the lines between predator and prey, compassion and fear, blurred in the face of real danger? Could this act of kindness ripple outward and recover the balance between human and wild? Or would it devolve into something darker, forever reshaping their understanding of nature's unwritten rules? As the sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows over the yard, the air settled in anticipation. A tipping point approached. The lioness and her cub nibbled at the offered food, yet the spectral shadows of uncertainty grew thicker, wrapping the family in a question that lingered. Could they be both protectors and prey in this profound exchange? With that tension hanging, a testament to the complexity of life in the wild, the story's true evolution awaited, ready to unravel into something monumental. The moment beckoned, time became untethered, and what would unfold next could change everything they thought they knew about compassion in the face of nature's rawness. What happens when the lines between predator and protector blur? When the primal instincts of survival clash with an unexpected call for compassion? In that instant, everything can pivot on a single choice. As the sun dipped further beneath the horizon, casting a warm glow over the quaint family home, the very air was thick with anticipation and uncertainty. The family stood rapt, hearts pounding as they watched the lioness and her cub, savoring the pieces of meat arrayed on the ground before them. The lioness, enormous and regal, exuded power and vulnerability in equal measure. As she gently guided her cub, teaching it the significance of the food before them, the family felt a transformative bond beginning to form, a silent agreement born from shared desperation. Was it a connection based solely on compassion, or something deeper, intertwining their very existences? Suddenly, a low growl broke the almost palpable silence, slicing through the atmosphere like a knife. Tension surged, electrifying the air around them. Their moment of kindness balanced precariously against the knife edge of danger. Fear surged anew in the family's hearts as they sensed movement beyond the lioness, a shift beyond their immediate understanding. Amidst the fading light, figures loomed on the periphery of the homestead. Shadows flickered and elongated, an unseen force stirred. Was it a rival predator lurking, drawn to the scent of prey? Reports of wildlife encroaching upon homes were rare. Yet this moment, fragile and precious, now threatened to shatter in a heartbeat. The initial bond of compassion felt fragile, hanging by a thread against the backdrop of instinctual survival. For a brief moment, the family remained frozen, the pulsating urgency of fight or flight grounding them in uncertainty. Overwhelmed by the juxtaposition of their instincts against the lioness's evident need for aid, they felt as though they found themselves on a tightrope suspended between two worlds. The lioness, majestic yet anxious, recognized the disturbance, her body tense and alert, fiercely protective of her only offspring. The psychological nuances of this encounter felt electrifying, an uncanny unveiling of the power dynamics between humans and wild creatures. Their home transformed into a theater of the primal. They suddenly occupied the roles of both savior and potential prey. The effects of social cognition began to bubble beneath the surface. What would compel them to help despite the risks? In another realm, perhaps life is made simple by abiding by societal norms. But in moments like these, beneath the veneer of humanity, instinct reigns supreme. A study on the motivations behind altruistic behavior reveals that acts of kindness often stem from empathy, stemming from shared experiences. But what do you do when the stakes are turned and your kindness invites danger? As if summoned by that internal struggle, the figures within the shadows began to materialize, smaller than the lioness, yet their intent was clear. A rival group of predators came forward. These were hyenas, typically known to hunt in packs, scavenging their way through life by exploiting the weaknesses of more formidable beings. The atmosphere shifted into one of palpable dread, as the hyenas prowled closer, their eyes glistening with predatory cunning. The lioness's instincts flared. She growled low, a ferocious claim to protect her cub. The family felt the tension in their bones. This was a wild drama unfolding. one which turned their yard into a stage where the rules of the jungle were about to play out. They were no longer mere spectators. They were participants in a reality that challenged their understanding of nature, ethics, and survival. Caught in this whirlwind of chaos, Dad, with that protective instinct heightened, stepped closer to the door. "We have to help," he said firmly, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. Grappling with the instinct to protect his family from potential danger. But how? In that dance between compassion and fear, what could they do against the entity of nature's course? They'd seen it in documentaries and wildlife shows, the predator-prey dynamics often embroiled in chaos, yet here it was, alive, raw, and truly at their doorstep. Mom gripped his arm, her voice hushed yet urgent. What if they lash out? Each glance exchanged was pregnant with the weight of profound contemplation. The children, wide-eyed and on the cusp of understanding life's enormities, were cradled between wonder and anxiety. They watched their parents, seeking a sign of assurance as animals collided in their vision, a proud lioness and her fragile cub against the relentless pursuit of the hyenas. In that decisive moment, a tapestry of history unfolded. The children, sensing the gravity of the situation, began to whisper. They recalled bedtime stories spun with both fantasy and fear, touching on the bond between all beings in nature, echoed the innocence of their voices, piecing together the narrative in their young minds. Those words turned the tide, igniting courage within the family. The decision crystallized. The lioness was not just a creature of ferocity, but a mother in desperate need, extending a thread of mutuality. Mom and Dad nodded, struggling to corral their fears against the weight of compassion. In that moment, they recognized that true bravery stems not from the absence of fear, but the willingness to lean into it for the sake of another. With a resolve that perhaps caught even themselves off guard, they retreated inside, hurriedly gathering an array of rope and sturdy tools that could create a barrier if needed. A protective ring felt necessary, something to maintain safety without severing the bond. They found themselves hastily prepping a form of sanctuary, unsure of how to navigate the primal unfolding but intent on cultivating safety for both the lioness and themselves. As they treaded back outdoors, the confrontation rippled on the horizon. The lioness stood unwavering, swathed in a mantle of determination, readying herself against the growing threat posed by the approaching hyenas. Each slinky form moved in and out of the shadows, their audacity evident. The children huddled behind their parents, murmuring mantras of bravery inspired by the ferocity they witnessed before them. What they didn't realize, though, was the lesson emerging, a psychological experiment in the making. The family's bravery cut through societal conditioning, stripping bare the layers of how one might label predator and isolation. Were they not entangled in the same survival narrative? Were they not on an equal footing in that bizarre moment at the intersection of humanity and the wild? As tension spiraled, the lioness turned, facing the encroaching pack of hyenas with a fierceness that radiated through the air. A primal standoff, the lioness, resolute and courageous, consolidated the hope she offered the family, her spirit casting a spotlight on the vulnerability of motherhood. Could they truly remain passive in witnessing her fight for survival? In a moment of communion, the family felt the anguish ripple within their own hearts. Beyond the thrill or the risk was an undeniable connection, a reminder of the sanctity of life that precipitated within all beings. And so, in a gesture that echoed throughout time and space, they released the tools they had gathered, stepping forward with an instinctive commitment to stand by this courageous mother. Crossing an invisible boundary forged by courage and understanding woven through empathy, the children, emboldened by their parents' resolve, glanced at each other, the power of belief reflected in their eyes. A bond was forming. The invisible threads of connection wound tighter while the air thrummed with a shared vitality. "We can't let fear win," whispered one, embodying the essence of all they had learned about compassion. Now confronted with reality's expectations, the family positioned themselves at the threshold between safety and risk. As the hyenas stole closer, bristling with intent, the lioness offered a muffled growl, a somber yet fierce warning to deter them. The family stood at the ready, adrenaline coursing through their veins, knowing this was not just about a lion and her cub. It was a battle between compassion and fear, love and instinct. But the conflict was escalating, the showdown profound. Did their compassion mount to the challenge? Would acts of kindness welcome the wrath of nature's most cunning beasts? As the hyenas edged forward, calculating their next move, the family braced against the winds of uncertainty, hearts pounding in sync. With a surge of adrenaline unlike any they had ever experienced, Dad stepped forward, embodying the sheer audacity of confronting the fierce. His shout disrupted the moment's tension, a rallying cry urging them all to hold fast amidst the brewing storm. He proclaimed, arms wide, a physical embodiment of unity echoing through the yard. In response, the lioness roared, a cascade of power erupting from her depths. The sound reverberated through the night, rising above the turmoil unfolding. The mighty vocalizations silenced the predators lurking just out of reach. The hyenas hesitated, uncertainty creeping in. In that stark moment, the family understood. They must unite, push back against fear, and become guardians of empathy. Yet, would such unification be enough? The wild had its own rules that dictated life and death, an unyielding force guiding hunters to hunt and protectors to protect. As they laid out in that tension-ridden night, decisions began to ripple outward, a catalyst for change intertwining their small family unit with forces far beyond their everyday comprehension. This moment, this standoff, was both transcendental and chilling, a reflection of the raw beauty of existence where instinct collides with compassion. Fear reigns in the hearts, and heroic love takes shape. With the children and the family standing resolute in their choices, they witnessed how the dynamic shifted literally in front of their eyes. Together, faith and fear coalesced. As the rivulets of time streamed onward, mere seconds stretched vibrantly into lifetimes, preparing for a climax whose outcome remained as nebulous as the stars suddenly glimmering above them. Would the bond of empathy cast enough strength to transform predator into protector? Or would nature's force prove too formidable, snuffing out the light of compassion and replacing it with the chilling vastness of survival's reality? Beyond the shadows of uncertainty, destiny hung in the balance, a wild, untamed tapestry that interwove their lives with that of the lioness and her cub. On the precipice of danger, their collective breaths caught in suspense. What would unfold, and who would emerge as champions when the last of the evening's light flickered and surrendered? What they didn't recognize was how this experience, poised delicately at the nexus of survival and compassion, could change everything they thought they knew about the bonds shared between strangers, reminding them that love and bravery can be found even in the wildest of circumstances, and that sometimes courage can bridge the gap between worlds far more disparate than they ever thought possible. What if I told you that the fabric of compassion can sometimes be woven in the most unexpected of places? Imagine a scene where a mother lion, embodying the very essence of determination and vulnerability, stands at the threshold of a family's home, extending her request for help, not just as a plea but as an expression of connection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the stage was set for an encounter that would challenge every assumption, creating ripples that would echo throughout their lives. In the quiet of a suburban afternoon, the world felt serene, a snapshot of ordinary life. Inside their cozy home, laughter spilled from the kitchen as the family gathered around the table, a seemingly typical moment of innocence and warmth. But outside, uncertainty lurked, waiting for its moment to strike. The lioness stood there, regal and poised, breathing softly, her golden fur glimmering in the fading light. You could sense her distress, a mix of fear and willful courage. She was not just a predator. She was a mother, driven by the fierce desire to protect and survive in an unforgiving world. As the family caught sight of her, a shift occurred. The air thickened with an inexplicable energy. Each of them felt it, the tension, the unexpected gravity of the moment. They had been taught all their lives to fear predators, to view them as symbols of danger, and yet there she was, asking for help. Could they challenge their deeply ingrained beliefs? Could they embrace the wildness without succumbing to the instinctual urge to retreat? Mom stepped tentatively toward the door, heart pounding with anxiety and apprehension. In that split second, She became the embodiment of courage in the face of fear. The lioness watched her with wary yet hopeful eyes, the kind that melted walls and reached through to the humanity nestled deep within. This was more than a question of survival, it was a test of empathy. As Mom instinctually reached out her hand, she felt the warmth radiating between them, a spark that connected them beyond mere species. In behavioral psychology, there's something called the bystander effect, a phenomenon that illustrates how people often hesitate to act in a crisis, believing someone else will step in. But in that moment, she intentionally chose to break the mold, to embrace the responsibility of humanity. She could not turn away. She refused to be a bystander. From the kitchen, Dad watched closely, grappling with emotions that swirled like a storm within him. Fear for his family's safety gnawed him relentlessly as he eyed the lioness who seemed so far removed from the life he knew. But as he observed the connection forming, he remembered the stories his own father told him of bravery in the face of uncertainty and the beauty that unfolds when we navigate the unknown. Who would he be if he allowed fear to dictate his response? "Let's help her," he said, his voice carrying a weight that grounded the family in purpose. With that one statement, an invisible tether bound them, an acknowledgement that their lives were irrevocably intertwined with this magnificent creature. It wasn't merely an act of charity, it was a profound revelation that the wild could infiltrate their lives, teaching them that strength is often painted in shades of vulnerability. As the lioness edged closer, her cub peeking from behind her, the family felt the current of responsibility embrace them. This moment was not solely about survival, it was a lesson in empathy, an awakening echoing through the generations, a chance for the kids to witness that nature often holds the key to understanding life's greatest lessons. Children, innocent and untainted, latched onto the lion cub's embrace of its mother. They understood the instinct to protect and nurture. But as the tension began to unravel, shadows danced at the edges of the yard, hyenas strode warily closer. Predators in their own right, they thrived on intimidation, always looking for the most opportune moment to strike. The lioness stiffened, eyes narrowing as she instinctively placed herself in front of her cub, a guardian ready to take on whatever strutted forth with calculated malevolence. The family collectively held their breath, fear creeping back in like a cold fog, a primal recognition of the often brutal reality of nature. They knew the lioness wasn't just putting on a brave face, she was preparing for a battle to protect her young against the very embodiment of danger. The children's eyes widened, and they instinctively huddled closer to their parents, searching for that refuge amidst the storm. In that heartbeat of uncertainty, a flood of thoughts churned within Dad. Social psychology tells us that adversity can galvanize people into taking action. They become unified in vulnerability. Would they stand with the lioness, shoulder to shoulder, even as danger loomed? Would they make a conscious choice to be allies to a creature often villainized in stories? With renewed determination, fueled by instinctual solidarity, Dad boldly stepped forward, brandishing a stick that had fallen from a nearby tree. "We won't let them take your cub," he proclaimed, his voice resonating with the savage strength of a father's resolve. The lioness, filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude, seemed emboldened by this show of support. Mom grasped her children, carefully guiding them out to stand behind their father, creating an unbreakable line of defense. In that singular moment, the family saw the lioness not just as an animal, but as an embodiment of motherhood, echoing the powerful bond they shared. They were on a precipice of a lesson in humanity and wildness, bound together in shared purpose. As the hyenas drew closer, they engaged in a low, chilling chatter, guttural sounds that sent shivers down everyone's spines. The moment teetered on the edge of chaos, poised to spiral into a fray that could rewrite the narratives they had lived by. But even amidst fear, hope flickered. Perhaps this was their moment to shift the narrative and cultivate a more compassionate world where alliances could form, even across divides. Suddenly, as if sensing the gravity of the situation, the lioness unleashed a raging roar that reverberated through the properties surrounding them, a call that demanded respect and instilled fear in the encroaching hyenas. The power of her voice served as a reminder, a profound acknowledgement that nature persists, fierce and unapologetic. The family, emboldened by her courage, stood firmly at her side. This newfound alliance transformed into a dynamic of raw strength, revealing the depth of bravery that lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to blossom. A blend of animalistic instinct and human empathy coalescing harmoniously against the impending threat. Just then, the hyenas hesitated, assessing the situation. They appeared unsure, caught off guard by the unusual sight, a family standing boldly with their wild counterpart, not as prey, but as protectors. The strength of unity blanketed the scene, and in that eye of the storm, an unlikely shift began to unfurl. The lioness exuded confidence, a sensation that surged from within. She took a step forward, rising to her full height as she displayed her powerful posture, radiating strength and defiance. This interaction mirrored countless instances in animal behavior studies, which illustrate that solidarity is often the strongest weapon against threats. Not only did it empower the lioness, but it also ignited a sense of purpose in the family. They became flesh and blood manifestations of courage. As they stood together, they forged a bond that transcended the encroaching darkness. It was intuitive, aligning with the fascinating concept of mirror neurons, how empathy is hardwired into us. The children, inspired, felt their fears dissolved amidst the fury of courage coursing through the cool air, a tapestry of human emotion pulling them closer to the wild. With every beat of their hearts resonating in unison, they witnessed a transformation. In that heartbeat, the lioness roared again, the sound unyielding, drowning out the uncertain murmurs of the hyenas. And there, a pause. The hyenas were reluctant to advance, deterred by the intensity bubbling up before them. Suddenly, a flicker of instinct heralded a moment of chaos. The hyenas began to circle, looking for an opening to exploit. Disorientation crept in. At that critical juncture, Dad simultaneously marveled at the lion's instinctual knowledge of strategy while feeling the weight of protective responsibility for the young cub, their newly adopted ally. In the embodiment of Mother Nature herself, the lioness engaged not just in the fight for survival, but in a powerful narrative of coalescence. It served as a foundational moment for this family, testing their essence against the very fabric of their fears. They learned quickly that life is neither simple nor constrained by boundaries, straddling the lines of predator and protector with breathtaking elegance. With their fear swirling, grounded in the irony of their shared humanity, Dad shouted out, "Stay together." Children experienced a simultaneous surge of bravery, pulsating like the beats of drums echoing from the depths of their ancestors. They filled their voices with fortitude, joining in as a chorus, chanting words of resilience, a testament to unity in the face of danger. The unexpected result? A transformative shift. As they summoned their courage and displayed unity, connected by purpose, the hyenas hesitated again, visibly rattled. Nature's merciless rules began to shift as all beings stood together in mutual recognition. Survival was no longer singular. It danced on the precipice of collaboration. With resolute intention, the family stood firm beside the lioness. Together they were powerful enough to inspire fear in the hearts of those who thrived on scaring the weak. In that moment, a flicker of optimism ignited, the potential to reshape their story cemented by the union of beasts and humans. Yet in the thickening tension, one element remained clear. While the lioness and her cub appeared to be finding safe harbor, the sense of imminent danger still loomed. They were all acutely aware that the night was still young, and nature often has a way of revealing its true self in the most unexpected turns. Would this newfound alliance hold strong when genuine peril arrived? Because beyond the look of solidarity stood the reality that survival is never guaranteed. It is a delicate dance driven by instinct, intuition, and sometimes sheer luck. The couple of hyenas hesitated, but continued to circle, seeking to find the weakest link. And as they did, a creeping realization settled in, a glimmering truth that would shape their inevitable fates. As the tension reached its breaking point, the lioness prepared herself to protect her cub against the relentless approach of the hyenas. The family stood rock solid, eyes wide with determination, yet heart-pounding adrenaline coursed through them like a tidal wave. Their moment of choice hung in the air, a chance to become allies with the wild, propelling their hearts toward a direction they never anticipated. This defining moment, poised to leap into action, could not just redefine their reality, but could also serve as a bridge to a kinder understanding of the interplay between man and nature. What happens when you confront the wild at heart? What happens when compassion meets primal instinct in a blinding flash of shared consciousness? As they braced for the impending rush, knowing that a sacrifice might become unavoidable, they felt exhilaration swell within, a kinship neither creature nor human had ever truly imagined could exist. They would fight wild and noble, embracing the divine interplay of existence itself. For in that moment, they profoundly understood one truth. Every magnificent being, caught up in the wild embrace of life, deserves the gift of courage. The unfolding drama, the lioness protective and the family resolute, ignited the question of fate. Would they unite with love and courage to forge a new alliance? Or might fear unravel their very existence as the realities of nature swept in? The air hung heavy, the answer yet to be revealed, but one thing remained true. The heart of the wild can teach humanity more than we may ever truly know. And so, as the fate of this moment turned, suspense enveloped them all. What lay ahead in the grip of animal instincts and human emotions was yet to be discovered. They were caught in an evolving denouement that nestled dangerously between the immediacy of survival and the grace of mutual respect, an unfolding tale that might ultimately change them all forever. What happens when the wild seeks refuge at your doorstep? When instinct blurs the lines between predator and protector, can humanity override fear with compassion? These questions danced in the air, thick with tension, as the family hesitated, torn between the instinct to recoil and the relentless tug of empathy pulling their hearts toward the majestic lioness. With every second that passed, the lioness remained fixed at the door, her golden eyes alight with desperation, a primal plea for help. Behind her, her tiny cub nestled close, a fragile embodiment of innocence amid a world teeming with danger. You could almost hear the clock ticking down. Each moment an invitation to act, a crossroad requiring courage to challenge their presumed understanding of nature's hierarchy. The family stood in shocked silence. The rhythmic pulse of their hearts echoed in the stillness around them. Each individual felt the weight of fear and wonder intertwined. They were staring into the eyes of a creature synonymous with strength and ferocity. But here, she was showing vulnerability, a stark contrast to the wild image portrayed in countless documentaries and stories that had shaped their views. This was no ordinary encounter. It was a profound moment waiting to unfold. Mom was the first to step forward, her nurturing instinct flickering alive. As she edged out of sight, the deep-seated protective instincts of motherhood awakened in her. In psychology, there's a concept known as emotional contagion, where feelings can transmit from one individual to another. In that instant, as she stepped into the lioness's gaze, a silent conversation began, a profound exchange of trust and fear that danced in the air between them. But for Dad, the tension manifested in every fiber of his being. He grappled with conflicting emotions, torn between primal instincts and the desire to protect his family. He recalled the stories told during family camping trips when they watched lions on the African savanna, fierce yet graceful. This was the world they were told to respect, but more so, it was a world they were taught to fear. Yet here was a moment, raw and truthful, challenging all preconceived notions. Would he lean into that fear or embrace an unexpected ally? The lioness, sensing the closeness of their energy, shifted slightly, revealing the soft form of her cub. This subtle motion sparked something deep within Dad. He thought about how every child deserves safety, regardless of their species. The very essence of fatherhood ignited in him, protecting the vulnerable. This wasn't just a lion and her cub at the door. It was a maternal bond echoing across the vastness of the animal kingdom, reflective of every parent, human or otherwise. "Look at her," he found himself murmuring, the words slipping out before he could censor them. His voice held a tone of awe, a recognition that something sacred was unfolding before them. The children were wide-eyed, having peeked from behind their mother. Their innocence brought an additional layer to the unfolding drama. They viewed the lioness without the learned fear, only curiosity and wonder painted on their young faces. In those moments when a child gazes upon the world, they grasp truths often overlooked by adult cynicism. They were witnessing a story that could rewrite their understanding of nature, from adversary to ally, from predator to protector. Meanwhile, the lioness remained poised, her breath harmonizing with the muted gasps of the family. It was as if time had awoken, presenting them a moment of clarity amid the chaos of their lives. Would they answer her call? As Dad took a breath, surprise filled him. The air thickened with the reality of their relationship, a union born in mutual need. The family stood on the cusp of a decision, one that would either affirm their humanity or push them back into the recesses of fear. Social psychologists emphasize the notion of the bystander effect, the inclination to look towards others for cues on how to react in times of crisis. Yet here, as the lioness became more than merely a wild animal needing help, the family realized this was their moment, their singular opportunity to act against instinct. Mom declared, stepping forward decisively now, her eyes unwavering as they met the lioness. In that instant, her words served as a catalyst, igniting a quiet courage in the children. They watched their parents through the lens of admiration, seeing two people uniting to face a fierce battle, one rooted not just in love, but in a striking alliance with nature itself. Their perspective shifted, unraveling preconceived narratives about wildness and vulnerability, all intertwined in the cycle of life. With hearts pounding, the family gathered around the lioness, recognizing the subtle glow of hope nestled within her vulnerability. Dad found a few old blankets from the garage. What he once thought of as useless clutter now became critical. They gathered close to the lioness, feeling the warmth of her body, a living, breathing creature seeking solace in the empathy of another. In that shared space, a certain enlightened realization crossed Dad's mind, a blend of courage and acceptance that this was their new reality. Just then, a rustle, not from the lioness, but from the bushes beyond the garden. A sudden realization crashed over Dad. It was a communication of danger, a warning. The very predators the family had feared were now on the prowl, enticed by the scent of vulnerability hung thick in the air. Their instincts screamed that time was of the essence, yet the pull of compassion remained resolute. The sound of hyenas echoed through the twilight, their chatter eerily rhythmic as they edged closer, signaling an encroaching threat. What should follow next? In moments like this, the principles of survival often come to the fore, a fight-or-flight response that pulsated in each heartbeat. Fear surged like a tidal wave, yet amidst it lay a sense of duty, the family now aware they were woven into the fabric of this moment. The lioness looked toward the voices of her potential allies, her courage seeming to swell. She lowered her head, instinctively guarding her cub, as if understanding that the fight would require all of them to unite against the impending threat. In those few seconds, a whirlwind of thoughts cascaded through Dad's mind, a kaleidoscope of emotion and memories, from autumnal days in the deep woods where he felt alive, to nighttime tales of daring heroes stepping forward in the face of danger. Social psychology has shown how people often draw on prior experiences to form responses during crises, and here his heart echoed ancestral echoes calling for bravery. With the hyenas circling, Dad mustered voice and strength. "We stand together." The resolve he felt threaded through his tone, reaching the depths of his family, while simultaneously beckoning the lioness to believe in their unlikely partnership. The fervor behind her words stunned the children, awakening a surge of innocence transforming into fierce courage. As the hyenas edged in, they felt the energy shift, a palpable wave of unity solidifying between the two species. It was a moment suspended in time, a vivid illustration of resilience, emotion mingled with instinct. With uncertainty melding into courage, the family began to strategize. They might not have the experience of seasoned warriors, but together, they possessed a unique strength, the combined power of humanity and the wild. Could they become the force that defied tradition against all odds? With the lioness positioned protectively in front of her cub, she turned her body unsupported toward the advancing hyenas, her roar filling the air once again. It was a sound laced not only with ferocity, but also with a silence of understanding. It was an invitation that echoed through the hearts of the humans beside her. She was fierce, yes, but so were they now, a collective force of nature urging them not to yield. As the hyenas advanced, uncertainty rippled through the air. Would their bravado quench the unease that gripped their hearts? Out of the corner of his eye, Dad saw a flash of movement, something beautiful yet brutal in its abruptness. A terrible wave of panic threatened to crest. With one determined motion, they passed one of the blankets to the lioness. A tangible gesture of solidarity, born from their mutual vulnerability. It was an offering, an act that symbolized not just protection, but an acknowledgement that they were one with the wild, intertwined in all things that breathe. In the chill of twilight, as the hyenas suddenly began to stalk forward, doubt littered the path ahead. Would their valor withstand the onslaught of primal instinct? Real bravery lies not in the absence of fear, but in the strength to operate despite it. This moment in the fading light, this was their time to shine. In the ensuing moments, the tension erupted into an uneasy melee of growls, roars, and the playful cries of the little ones. The sight of a family, both human and animal, standing defiantly together, sent ripples through the natural world. The hyenas, drawn in by curiosity and the anticipation of an easy meal, found themselves facing an unexpected barrier, an alliance greater than any fierce competition of survival. The lioness lunged forward in primal defense, her bathed muscles emanating raw power and assurance. But the family pressed forward too, shouting, waving, creating a cacophony of sound that sent vibrations through the grass. Go away. What unfolded next was a muddle of action akin to a powerful storm rolling in, both captivating and harrowing. The hyenas, surprised by the sheer audacity of their prey, hesitated. A vital second passed, crystallizing the understanding that in that moment of fear, courage danced bravely across boundaries, encapsulating not just life, but a feral beauty. And then, with an almost cinematic flair, the lioness and the family stepped forward together, creating an unbreachable line of defense. A fierce roar erupted into the night air, rising higher than any other sound, reverberating through the hearts of all present. Would instinct guide them to an exhilarating victory, or might they fall into the clutches of their fears? This powerful alliance has not only reshaped how they would perceive their lives, but how their futures could echo the lessons of compassion and courage out into the world. In these moments, one question seemed unavoidable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, would they emerge on the other side of fear, forever changed by the raw beauty of connection? They had become something new, a tapestry woven from strands of ferocity, fear, love, and compassion. And as the clouds shifted, it became clear. The lioness, the family, together they would confront the darkness looming just beyond the veil. They had recognized that nature was not just about survival. It was about the relationships formed through adversity. As the last rays of twilight disappeared, and the world slipped into the encroaching night, the stage was set, and the outcome teetered on a precipice. Would they confront the storm? This was not merely a fight between carnivore and prey. It was a bold challenge against the narratives deep within their hearts, a dance that transcended existence. What lay ahead in the shadows of uncertainty? Only the wild would tell. As the fight surged on, illuminating the path taken against the darkness, revealing that in every roar echoed a heart. The heart of the wild struggled to unite against the fate they had been given, leaving only questions strung out like fragile stars across the vast expanse, a testament to the struggles yet to unfold in the dance between man and beast. And so, the fight began to unfold, a story not only of survival, but of transcending fear itself. Of beings, not just of flesh and fur, but of spirit rising together amidst the calls of the wild. As they braced themselves against the night, the borders between predator and protector began to blur, and what happened next would forever alter their perception of nature and its wild beauty, a journey they would not soon forget. What if the fiercest hunter in the animal kingdom knocked on your door asking for help? It sounds like the premise of a gripping wildlife documentary or a heart-pounding thriller, yet for the Johnson family, it was a reality. But what awaited them on the other side of that door was so much more than a simple plea. It was a confrontation with nature that would challenge their very understanding of safety and instinct. Picture this: the lioness, regal and powerful, stood at the doorstep. Her graceful body contrasted sharply with the vulnerability mirrored in the pleading gaze of her cub, who clung to her as if the world outside was just a bit too overwhelming. As the Johnsons hesitated, the air thickened with an innate tension. The lioness was far from the menacing figure one often imagines her to be. Instead, she radiated an unyielding desperation that transcended the natural fear she typically inspires. As Dad, holding the door slightly ajar, slipped into a deep contemplation, memories rushed in like waves crashing against the shore. He thought of the countless nature documentaries, where lions reigned supreme in the wild, brutal yet majestic. Yet here was a lion at his doorstep, redefining what it means to be a predator. Here was a figure of strength, asking for help. It was a startling juxtaposition that shattered stereotypes, casting a light on the nuanced interplay between fear and compassion, predator and protector. This moment wasn't merely a clash of instincts. It tapped into psychological principles that shape our very humanity. One such example comes from social psychology, often encapsulated in the concept of empathy. Research indicates that when faced with another creature in distress, our brains can shift gears away from self-preservation and toward a desire to help. The biological response they were about to experience, driven by compassion rather than fear, was not only rare but powerful. Mom, watching her husband wrestle with the sight before them, felt a wave of emotion surge through her. She had spent years teaching her children that kindness is the most potent weapon against fear. Here was the living testament to that belief, standing right before them. Wasn't this the very essence of love they so often spoke about? That the fiercest of creatures could also embody vulnerability. As curious eyes peered from behind their parents, the children, barely aware of the inherent danger, felt nothing but wonder at the sight. What could be more surreal than encountering a lioness in a suburban neighborhood? It was as if nature had woven a story right into their lives, urging them to embrace the unexpected and the unknown. But as they stood there, the very notion clawed at Dad's sanity. What if the lioness in her desperation became violent? What if she sensed their hesitation as a threat? The roaring silence hung heavy as anxiety tugged at his chest. In that critical moment, he could already feel the gravity of the decision weighing down his resolve. Taking a breath that quivered with tension, Dad brought his focus back to the lioness. "It's okay," he whispered, half to himself and half to the fierce creature before him. The lioness, sensing the bond slowly forming, stepped forward, her eyes locked onto his. It was more than a gaze, it was an invitation to step into the wildness of her truth. In that moment, empathy surged like wildfire among the family, igniting their deepest instincts. They realized they had the opportunity, both terrifying and awe-inspiring, to bridge the gap between humanity and the wild. Dad finally pushed the door open fully, his heart racing with both fear and an invigorating sense of purpose. "We'll help you," he declared, more to reassure himself than the lioness. As Mom rushed to gather blankets and food, driven by a maternal instinct that seemed to echo the very essence of nurturing, the tension shifted. It was as if nature itself breathed with that acceptance. A lioness moved closer, her stance slightly less rigid, the non-threatening nature of the moment crystallizing into something beautiful. A new bond was forming, an alliance against adversity. This was far more than a simple act of altruism. The family stood there, exchanging glances that reflected newfound strength, united in purpose. They were not just offering help to a wild creature, they were reaching across the vast expanse of understanding, embodying the convergence of two worlds, the wild heart and the cultivator of warmth. As they approached the lioness ever so cautiously, Dad couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were higher than merely feeding her. They were embarking on an uncharted territory, a psychological experiment in trust and vulnerability that could shake the very roots of societal norms and perceptions. This was a test of their very nature. It called into question everything they knew about fear, about power, and most importantly, about compassion. The lioness, gentle yet fierce, relaxed slightly. She seemed to understand that they were not her enemies, but potential allies in the unfolding chaos of life. In that moment, the family experienced an uncanny shift, what psychologists sometimes refer to as situational empathy, the ability to resonate with another's emotional experience, even in extreme circumstances. The children witnessing this exchange felt a rush of understanding wind through them. They no longer saw a lion as simply a ruler of the jungle, but rather as a fellow traveler on the journey of existence. Hank, the eldest, picked up a blanket he had once used for camping. "For her?" he asked, eyes alight with the innocence of possibility. "Go ahead," Mom encouraged, her own heart swelling with pride at her children's spirit. Together, they approached the lioness once more. As they enveloped her with the blanket, the lioness seemed to truly relax for the first time, her massive head lowering in validation. The warmth of their collaboration enveloped her like a protective veil, a gesture that bridged the divide of species, a momentous leap for human-animal relations. But as an unanticipated twist in their tale unfolded, a dark shadow emerged on the periphery. Just beyond the comfort of their yard lurked the ever-encroaching threat. Another group of lions prowled the neighborhood, drawn in by the commotion, a gang that would put their newfound trust to the ultimate test. With only moments to react, Dad heard a low growl ripple through the air, sending shivers down their spines. It was an unmistakable sign a group of rogue male lions was on the scent, drawn to the vulnerability of a solitary mother and her cub. Their protectiveness was primal, fierce, and their instinct to assert dominance in the face of perceived weakness could spell disaster for the lioness at the door. He shouted sharply, feeling rising adrenaline create urgency. Fighting against fear had brought them this far, but the steps forward now necessitated tactical thinking. As the sound of danger encroached, panic crept within the walls of the Johnson home. They were on the brink of a clash that would tear through everything they had built in those precious moments of connection. What if those lions weren't simply demanding space? What if they wanted to reclaim their territory, a territory that momentarily felt safe because of the Johnsons' compassion? Such complexities of nature, where love often dances closely with violence, hung in the air. Mom grabbed Hank and Lucy, pulling them back into the house. The instinct of protecting her children overrode her deep need to understand this situation at its core. Dad, however, had other ideas. As he sensed the growing threat outside, his desire for justice and fairness surged forth. Compelling him to stand guard, he pleaded, holding out his arm, refusing to close the door of compassion. Every moment chilled the air with a dichotomy of fear and courage, the weight of their choices compressing around them. Mom shouted back, a mix of panic and helplessness saturating her words. The children huddled close, their eyes wide with confusion and a desperate need for clarity. In the distance, the low growls crested into roars of dominance, an unmistakable declaration of wildlife behavior. When threatened, the predator instinct takes over. The lioness at the door stiffened again, the maternal instinct fierce, the raw need to protect her cub flickering like candlelight in the gathering darkness. Dad could feel the embers of hope mixed with anxiety igniting within him. "Look," he said, turning back to the children and Mom. "She's going to protect her cub." With that simple declaration, he took a step toward the door. Just then, another roar split the atmosphere. This was close, too close. He glanced back at his family. They were frozen, flush with fear and uncertainty. They had just crossed an unassailable threshold into the depths of danger. Dad shouted, adrenaline-fueled courage rippling through his veins as he leaped forward. He swung open the door wide, defiance radiating from him. The lioness stood majestic, silhouetted against the encroaching darkness, every muscle in her body tense yet resolute. "Together," he urged, rallying the last reserves of empathy, trust, and human resilience. And in that pivotal moment, a transformation washed over all of them, a collective spirit melding into one. In the face of danger, their woven bonds surged forth, a powerful force defining their humanity and their instinct for justice, for life itself. Time hung heavily in the air as the growls approached, and the shadows of the other lions loomed closer. The lioness looked into Dad's eyes. Seemingly understanding the promise of unity, the shared conviction that everything they had nurtured together was more powerful than fear itself. What would happen next? The tension rose like a tide, threatening to consume them. It was a culmination of instinct, fear, and the raw courage to confront what lay ahead. Would they emerge triumphant, hugging the boundaries of compassion and bravery, or would the unspeakable chaos of nature's primal theater erupt around them? In that charged atmosphere, one unmistakable truth pierced through the din. The battle for empathy and understanding had only just begun, and the reality of their intertwined fates hung delicately in the balance, teetering on the precipice of the unknown, heartbeats synchronizing as they prepared for the onslaught of what lay ahead. As the couple, the children, and the lioness stood resolutely against the encroaching darkness, they understood one undeniable truth. The dance of life often balances precariously between light and shadow, compelling them to embrace the adventure that awaited, a journey that would test the limits of love, fear, and courage. And as the sun dipped behind the horizon, igniting the sky in fiery hues, they stood at the threshold of a story they would never forget, a testament to the wild beauty that lies within our hearts when faced with the extraordinary. What would take form from that moment? Would they find their way together, or would nature's instinct dictate the outcome? And the wild awaited. But what happens when a dominant predator, the very essence of fear itself, suddenly finds itself at the mercy of humanity? When a lioness stands at your doorstep, pleading not only for life but for trust, what do you do? The Johnson family, lingering in the space between dread and compassion, faced a reality that few would ever encounter. Their story continued in ways that would test their very core. The weight of the lioness's gaze was tangible, a fierce blend of vulnerability and primal strength illuminating her presence. Dad's heart raced, a tempest of confusion and instinct battling within him. Moments ago, he had wallowed in the safety of his suburban bubble. Now, he grappled with the visceral essence of survival. Would he cower in fear, or reach out across the common boundaries between man and beast? As those seconds stretched on, he felt the ethereal pull of empathy, a psychological phenomenon that has deeply woven itself into the fabric of human existence. Psychologists often point to how our brains light up at the sight of another being in distress, igniting the age-old instinct to protect. In that way, Dad wasn't just facing a lioness asking for help. He was confronting his own humanity. Mom, grasping her children's shoulders tightly, looked into the lioness's eyes and saw more than a wild animal. It was a mother, fierce and dedicated, desperately seeking protection for her cub. Instinctively, her heart softened. Each family member felt the tension build. Fear morphed into a heightened awareness, a reminder of how interlinked all beings are, whether through love or instinct. "Stay behind me," Dad whispered to his children, adopting a protective stance before the door, yet fully aware of the myriad dangers behind such a decision. The lioness stepped closer, her body language radiating a strange mix of strength and surrender. Here lay a moment of reckoning, not just in the presence of nature's predator, but within the souls of the Johnsons. Just as their emotional resolve met the gravitational pull of fear, the very universe around them seemed to shift. A distant growl rippled through the air, a reminder that out there, in the shadows cast by their hedge, danger lurked. The lioness stiffened, her protective instincts flaring to life. It became clear that what was once a plea had transformed into a race for survival. Would they summon their courage and align with this magnificent creature, or would they retreat into the comfortable safety of their home, leaving her and her cub to fend for themselves? The tension was palpable, akin to that fragile moment in a thriller movie, when the protagonist is faced with an impossible decision, to save or to abandon. As the growls drew nearer, time felt fluid, slipping away like sand through fingers. The children clung to each other, wide-eyed and frozen in fear and awe. Just outside the home, shadows began to loom, hinting at the arrival of more lions, nature's own mating call twisting into a declaration of territorial claim. Would they become the prey of a pride? Would they bite off more than they could chew by stepping into the fray? "Open the door wider," Dad instructed, his voice steady but laced with urgency. This was the moment that would define their character, and he wanted them to see it all. He would not allow uncertainty to shadow their perception of bravery. Hesitating for only a heartbeat, he swung the door wide open, exposing the lioness to the raw element of surprise, both for her and for the dark forces encroaching upon the threshold. Let her in. The words seemed to echo around them, a desperate bid for connection with a creature shaped by instinct rather than malice. As the lioness stepped over the threshold with purposeful grace, a transformative bond forged in the heat of fear began to ignite. The family members took a collective inhale, the kind you feel in cinematic moments. This was the pivot of their story, a merging of paths as instincts collided. They could have easily dismissed her, a figure of potential danger, but driven by the neural impulses of empathy, they chose action. Just then, the boundaries of nature and nurture coalesced. The second lioness emerged from the underbrush, an imposing figure with a commanding presence that threatened to shatter the delicate balance they had just formed. Dad stepped forward instinctively, the energy of the moment urging him to protect not just his family, but the defenseless lioness and her cub. He shouted, the primal energy of a protective father driving him forward. They all felt it, the innate trigger that pushes one to defend at all costs. Just as he reached the threshold, a guttural roar erupted from the newcomer, sending ripples of terror through every familial bond present. "Mom," commanded, her protective instincts igniting. This was not just about two carnivores. This was a battle for survival, about allegiance and family ties within the animal kingdom. But even amidst danger, something deeper was at play. The lioness shielded her cub, showing protective aggression not against them, but toward the looming intruder. In the wild, rivalries often transform compassion into chaos. The Johnsons had unintentionally stepped into a primal ballet, where the stakes were measured not in seconds, but in every heartbeat, every breath. They witnessed firsthand that in nature, alliances can emerge unexpectedly, stitched together by instinct. As the initial shock settled, a profound understanding took root in each family member. They were caught up in an intricate web of interspecies relationship dynamics. They had invited tension into their lives, but who would emerge as victor in this battle of life? Would the wild welcome the warmth of their humanity, or would the lioness's rival claim victory in a display of nature's awe-inspiring brutality? Amidst the struggle, Dad, with his steady resolve, understood he had only moments left to make a decision. He glanced to his children. Their expressions were a mix of fear and fascination, grappling with a reality that transcended bedtime stories. Would they leave the lioness to fend for herself, or would they band together, risking everything to protect what they had inadvertently promised? This conflict mirrored the age-old narratives woven through human history, a constant tug-of-war between safety and risk, between protection and abandonment. Various studies in social psychology illustrate how, when one experiences empathy, aggression often dissipates. Would they be able to pull off such a feat, standing before wild beasts? He urged, and against the primal fears chesting forth, they reached out, hands gripping the blankets gathered moments ago. It would serve as a vestige of safety for the lioness, a shield, a statement of courage in the face of brutal instinct. The lioness turned her gaze to them, and Dad could see an acknowledgement in her eyes, a flicker of hope in a world that often leaned toward fear. She stepped slightly toward them, her gaze shifting between the cub and the encroaching threat. Time felt suspended, a poignant reminder that this moment was not solely about survival. It was about connection and unraveling the complexities of coexistence. And in an extraordinary display of unity, the mother lion charged toward the rival. Fur bristling, warning growls erupting like thunder on the plains, the courage birthed within the Johnson family surged forth, infusing the air with an electric energy that filled the space between the danger and love. In that surreal frenzy, it suddenly became clear the line between combat and camaraderie was often forged in the fires of adversity. Just then, the rival lioness raised her head, comprehension etched upon her fierce visage as she processed the unexpected alliance. Within that brief exchange of power, there was a hush, a moment where understanding triumphed over mere instinct. The two lionesses faced off, and for Dad, every second elongated into eternity. Would their act of compassion unite them against a common threat? The tiger, in all his ferocity, faced the warmth of love, born from the knowledge that they could indeed exist side by side. Just as the rival lioness hesitated in uncertainty, a flicker of hesitation, a twist of perception, the space between predator and prey began to widen, replacing aggression with an understanding that echoed across the landscape of instinct. The emotional investment had been made, and the Johnson family stood side by side, courage linking them to the lioness, as she positioned herself in front of her cub, signaling solidarity, signaling support in the wild complexity of life. A lesson birthed, that true alliances can emerge even from places steeped in fear and defensiveness. But as the rival lioness eyed her potential targets, circling on her haunches, they felt the strange pull of nature's reality. The dance of the wild was still very much alive. The scenario hinged precariously between harmony and chaos, waiting to tip into the abyss. Yet in that beautiful turmoil lay the breathtaking testament of survival, the depth of compassion tested against instinct, and in that balance, the remnants of fear swirling within their hearts began to wash away. Would victory come from confrontation, or was there a far deeper lesson embedded in this raw display of bravery? The night thickened with tension, anticipation settling like a shroud around them. The lionesses stood poised, ready to dance the primal ballet of power, and the Johnson family was about to witness whether courage alone could shift the tides of nature. Would they witness a historic event of interspecies solidarity, or would chaos erupt, forcing them to grapple with repercussions of their choices? As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the outcome hung precariously over them, tempting hope and dread to waltz upon the edge of reality. What lay ahead was unknown, but one thing was clear. The story unfolded in shared breaths and quickened heartbeats, a journey cloaked in vulnerability and strength, reminiscent of the very fabric of life itself, woven by the hands of both predator and protector. And in that moment, with the stakes at an all-time high, the fate of the Johnson family, the lioness and her cub, intertwined into a singular narrative of bravery and compassion, an undeniable truth that sometimes, even amidst the shadows of nature's fiercest creatures, the light of understanding can forge a path to unity. As the echoes of the uncertain roar lingered in the night, they all poised at the brink, ready to embrace whatever came next. Aware that the choice for connection against the chaos of fear resonated far beyond the animals outside their door. It spoke to the very essence of what it means to be alive and to love in a world that so often thrives on the lines drawn between predator and prey.